Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, we have discussed about the planning in India, and as you know, planning leads to the development. Today, we will discuss about the developmental administration. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio Dr. Mani Bhushan. He teaches political science in Delhi University. So I hope his knowledge and experience will help us to understand this developmental administration in new perspective. So on your behalf, I welcome Dr. Mani Bhushan for EduSet lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Administration, as you all know, is all about implementation of plans and policies and programs. Many a times you would come across statements like, policies were good, but the implementation was bad, and so the policy or the program did not yield the desired result. So, when the scholars started concentrating on administration, they tried to develop a science of administration. How can you administer the best? From scientific method to the classical school, to the behavioral school, to the post-behavioral school. So many scholars concentrated on various means and methods to develop a science of administration. The bureaucratic model, all of you know, developed by Max Weber, claimed to be the best in terms of effectiveness, the most scientific method of organization. But when after the Second World War, new countries became independent and were faced with variety of challenges, from underdevelopment to social chaos to political underdevelopment, the same administrative machinery which was organized on the bureaucratic model in the West and was delivering very successfully was found lacking. The same scientific administration failed in the post-colonial developing societies to yield desired results, to become effective. Because the requirements of the newly independent states were rapid growth in all sectors, plus stability, plus democracy, plus social justice. Now these things, the advanced countries, the administration in the advanced countries were not concerned about. But in developing societies, these were very, very important. Now there was another problem. At the time of independence, suppose you take India for example, at the time of independence, the private sector was almost non-existent. A few hundred entrepreneurs here and there. The torchbearers of development, democracy and capitalism in the West were the private entrepreneurs. But in post-colonial societies, because of the colonial intervention, the indigenous entrepreneurship was not allowed to develop to the level where they could become torchbearers of development and change. So a very weak private sector was a problem. Another problem was acute poverty and underdevelopment. Because of colonial exploitation and extraction, there was acute poverty. It was very, very difficult for the people to get 2 square meals. In many states, there were famines and starvation deaths taking place. So you had to overcome poverty, underdevelopment, food scarcity on a war footing. Then the political parties, India was fortunate to have a pan-Indian organization which fought for independence. But in many other colonial societies, political parties were not developed enough. Now, a political party or pressure groups, these are institutions which bring the people closer to government. The aspirations, the needs, the problems of the people are brought to the government for redressal and solution through political parties and pressure groups, which in post-colonial societies were either non-existent or were very weak. So it was left to this institution of administration because they had the experience, because the colonial rulers used administrative machinery to rule over. So they had the experience of governance. They were educated. They were organized. So administration had to take up a different role altogether from that of administration in the developed societies, which Woodrow Wilson very clearly wanted to be different from policy makers. The politics administration dichotomy, as you all know. So the bureaucratic model was not helping. You had to develop a new standard, a new ideal type for the developing societies. Now it was not going to be very easy because during the colonial period the administration was oriented and trained to become public masters, to rule over. And after independence, administration has to become take the role of public servant. So it had to be difficult, and that is where the whole idea of development administration becomes very, very important to understand. Professor S.P. Verma claimed that the term development administration was coined by Mr. Goswami, H.L. Goswami, in 1955. But the term and the concept became popular in academics mainly after the comparative administration group of the USA took it up as a separate field of study. Now, comparative administration group was actually toying with the idea of a science of administration. Robert Dahl said that you could not imagine a science of administration unless and until you had the idea of comparative study of administrations. And from there it all began, and very soon it was realized that developing societies had very specific characteristics. Political milieu was different, economic conditions were different, socio-cultural contexts were different, and administration had to correspond to these specifics if it had to be effective. And so the idea of development administration is based on the concept of developing societies being different from the developed societies, of having specific characteristics which have to be taken into account if the administration has to be effective. Now, there have been various definitions and interpretations of development administration, but David Stone's definition covers almost all the parameters that one needs to understand. He says, development administration is the blending of all elements and resources. Resources would include human as well as material, physical, into a concerted effort to achieve desired goals. It is the continuous cycle of formulating, evaluating, and implementing interrelated plans, policies, programs, projects, activities, and other measures to reach established developmental objectives in a scheduled time sequence. Now, there are many specific terms used in this definition. It is blending of all elements and resources, number one. Number two, agreed upon goals. Number three, continuous cycle of formulating and implementation and evaluation of all plans, policies, programs, etc. And most importantly, reaching the established developmental goals in a specific time period. So this has to be kept in mind when we go further to discuss development administration. But before that, before we come to the specific features and characteristics of development administration, we would first very quickly see how is development administration different from traditional administration. Traditional administration, what we discussed earlier, the standard scientific bureaucratic administration which is yielding results or which is so successful and effective in the West. So traditional administration involves routine operations of regulatory nature. Many things are they just happen. It is regulatory. Things have been laid down. They are working themselves. They only have to regulate. That is it. Very routine work. Development administration, on the other hand, takes up new tasks and problems in a rapidly changing environment. See, when India became independent, 80% of our population was involved in agriculture and related activities. And we were not producing enough for even 50% of our population. Industrial scene was more precarious. So from there we have come to this stage where we have food reserves, we have industrial growth, we are number one in the IT sector, and so on and so forth. So the changes have took place in about 60 years. They have to take place very rapidly in the social sector, in the political sector, in the economic sector. In every sector there have been changes, and those changes are challenges for administration to adapt and also to guide those changes. Second, traditional administration is concerned mainly with implementation of plans and policies. As I said earlier, policy makers are different and policy implementers are different. So they are concerned, administration is concerned mainly with implementation of policies and programs. On the other hand, development administration has to take initiative. It has to play a role in formulation of policies as well. See, it is really something which we must understand very clearly. How, suppose in India, is a parliament. Parliament makes laws for the whole country. The inputs have to come from all over. Yes, we have elections and representatives from every corner are there in the parliament, but many a times, because of lack of expertise, lack of training, lack of education, lack of commitment, the actual issues do not get articulated, aggregated, and are not brought to the parliament in the form of the demand or aspiration of the people of remote areas. It is left to the administrative machinery, which has its reach, the VLW in the village and the BDO and so on and so forth. the administration is linked from the remotest, farthest to the center. And so most of the inputs that are required for policy making can effectively, properly come through the administrative machinery. So development administration has to play important role in policy formulation as well. Third, traditional administration emphasizes efficiency and economy on individual performances. See, things are all laid down. Every unit, every office is well defined and they are working. So at times you have individual excellence which makes a difference. But development administration lays emphasis on group performance. Group performance and intergroup collaborations for achieving goals. In traditional administration, goals are laid down by the political agencies, and you just have to, administration just has to implement, and that's it. But here in development administration, group performance is important. Individually you cannot do much, and intergroup collaboration as well. Suppose it is education. Now education, the administration has to collaborate with so many agencies, even NGOs, voluntary organizations, political parties, pressure groups, business houses. So administration here has to collaborate. Intergroup collaboration is also very important for development administration. Fourth, traditional administration emphasizes on rules, regulations, procedures, safe play and maintenance of status quo. Because everything has been well laid down, so all you have to do is adhere to the rules, regulations, procedures and play it safe, because you have to maintain a status quo. Development administration is change oriented. It has to bring about positive change. Rules and regulations should be there, yes, but more than that, development administration has to put emphasis on innovations, new procedures, new tools, new techniques to achieve the desired results. Fifth, traditional administration emphasizes elaborate hierarchical structures and centralized decision making. The bureaucratic model, and the decision flows from above to below and information from below to above, and so on and so forth. But in development administration, emphasis is on shaping of structures according to the requirements of the set goals, and also on shared decision making. Decision making cannot be centralized. It has to be shared decision making. Suppose it is a case of rural development. Who decides? The central rural development ministry, or the state level rural development ministry, or the DPAP, or the collector, or the panchayat system, or the other very IRDP. So many agencies, so many programs, so many projects are going on, and so there has to be a shared decision making if you have to achieve the desired result. Traditional administration is basically executive type, whereas development administration is basically managerial type. Executive is you execute, managerial is you manage. Right. However, it is the conditions and situations that distinguish development administration from traditional administration, and not the services. This should be borne in mind. We will come to this later. The conditions and situations distinguish, not the services. Now we come to the characteristics of development administration. What are the basic features? According to Riggs, Fred W. Riggs, he is one of the most reputed scholar in this field of development administration. According to Riggs, development administration is both development of administration and administration of development. So, administration of development, you all understand? Developmental projects, plans, policies, you have to administer, implement. So, administration of development. What is development of administration? Development of administration would mean development of the machinery which would implement programs, policies, etc., etc. How can administration be more efficient? How can it be more effective? So, development of administration and administration of development, according to Riggs, continuously keep affecting each other. Development of administration would make administration of development better, and administration of development would make development of administration better. There exists a chicken and egg type of causation between the two. Chicken to egg and egg to chicken. Both there is a causation relation. For example, education policy. If the education policy is implemented in a fine manner, it will make the society educated. And an educated population would be in a better position to articulate and aggregate their problems and aspirations. They would be in a better position to demand better policies and implementation, and that would make administration develop, because you have to meet the aspirations of the people, right? So, good administration makes the implementation better, and good implementation makes the administration better. Second, Riggs says that development administration is shaped by the political, economic and socio-cultural contexts. Political, economic and socio-cultural contexts, and it also affects and shapes those contexts. Now again, in any society you have a political system, you have an economic system, and you have your social cultural system, and each of them is at a particular level of development. We talk of democracy, but democracy in India, democracy in Bangladesh, democracy in France, democracy in Sweden, democracy in Italy and democracy in America would all be at different planes. So you have to be different for the different political context. Then only administration would be able to deliver better. Economics, what is the economic system? Is it capitalism or socialism? If it is capitalism, what is the level of economic growth that you are maintaining? There are countries like China. Till late 1970s, China was considered to be a backward economy. And today, it is competing with the best in the world, including USA. And so, according to your economic conditions, you have to deliver. The administration has to correspond to the political consciousness, to the economic conditions, and to the socio-cultural milieu as well. The administration has to take into account the socio-cultural milieu. But Riggs also says that not only these contexts shape administration, even the development administration also shapes these contexts. They provide inputs for political development, they provide inputs for economic growth, they provide inputs for socio-religious changes. There can be n number of examples. Right. third characteristic, according to Pai Panandika, development administration is change oriented. Administration in the traditional sense was status quo oriented. Here in development administration is change oriented. It has to bring about changes, positive changes in positive direction. Second feature according to Panandikar is that development administration is goal oriented. Development administration has to help the government fix priorities and try and achieve the goals set by the system. The third feature is commitment oriented. Now, you all know about the concept of committed bureaucracy as existed in erstwhile Soviet Union or in China and other socialist totalitarian systems. But here commitment is commitment towards people, commitment towards service, not towards the government. So, Pai Panandikar suggests that instead of career staffing, development administration becomes more effective on the basis of program staffing. Because the administrators involved in a particular program for several years would develop some sort of affinity with the program. It will make them more motivated to do good work, and they'll also be in a position to make innovations. If it is career staffing, you jump from this from a particular program to another to another to another. The time you require to adjust to the new job profile would not get wasted if you were to continue in the same program. You would then develop some sort of acumen, insight, and which will help you innovate, which is so very important for development administration. The fourth is, according to Pai Panandikar, citizen participation oriented. Normally, citizens are beneficiaries. There are policies made for the welfare, for the development of the people, to resolve certain issues of affecting the people, and administration is there to implement. The people are the recipients, the beneficiaries. Development administration is citizen participation oriented. Citizens have to participate in administration in order to make it effective. There have been n number of studies on this. To very shortly and briefly put, people can participate in planning. See, the whole concept of planning from below is here. That the people who are to be the recipients, to be the beneficiaries, would know better what they want, how they want, when they want. And so they must be involved in planning. Then only the plan would be better, proper. Then their involvement in implementation. People or citizens must involve themselves in implementation. What happens is that a plan or a program is there and it is being implemented by rank outsiders who are not going to benefit or lose anything from a better implementation or wrong implementation. More often than not, this will result in improper implementation. But the people who are to benefit, if they are involved, naturally implementation would be better. You can take the example of a house. If you give it to a builder who is not going to live there, unless he is very conscious and conscientious, he'll not use the type of material and specifications which you would want to, because you are to live there. So that is why many people would want to supervise when their houses are being built, because they are to live there, and then naturally those houses would be more durable, stronger. Then people's involvement in monitoring. A road is being built. There are engineers, there are contractors, there are workers who are doing it, and who would hardly be using those roads. So the material they use, they are not bothered about the quality. But if the people who are to use that road, suppose it's a link road between a village and a town, the villagers will have to use that road. So if they are involved in monitoring, they would check, then naturally implementation would be better. So monitoring and evaluation. You have to evaluate. See, crores of rupees have been spent on rural development. Actually, thousands of crores. Where has the money gone? Nobody knows. Why? Because the people were not involved in evaluation process. If the money is being given to a panchayat or an agency which is involved in rural development, the beneficiaries, the people there should be entitled, should be authorized to evaluate. And unless this evaluation, continuous evaluation and monitoring and reporting is taking place, development administration cannot be effective. So, development administration has to be change oriented, goal oriented, commitment oriented, and citizen participation oriented according to Pipman and Dika. There's another orientation which scholars talk about, this client orientation. In most societies, you have various categories of population. Some are well off, some are not so well off, some are quite weak. There are people from a particular type of cultural milieu, a particular type of geographical location they live in, and so on and so forth. So, the possibility of a particular section of the society lagging behind others or lagging far behind others is very much there. So, development administration has to take care of these, all these people who are lagging far behind, or who cannot be covered or not getting covered in the mainstream. So, if there is an overall policy frame in which the administration is working, it may not yield desired results. For example, Article 16 of the Constitution says there should be equality of opportunity. Now, this is the overall framework, but it was also realized that certain sections lagged behind, and so you had the subclause 4, which suggests that if certain sections are lagging behind educationally, socially, the state can go in for protective discrimination, and so we have the reservation policy. Similarly, the administration also has to keep this in mind, that there are people who would not go along the mainstream, who would be shy or quite demoralized to be demanding something for them, and their administration must be more particular. Dwight Waldo, do you have time? Dwight Waldo and Han Bin Lee, they talk of temporal dimension of development administration. What they mean is that development administration has to achieve certain goals, but these goals must be achieved in a particular time frame. Too much delay would result in injustice. People cannot especially in post-colonial societies where people had suffered through ages. Now administration has to reach out to them. If there is undue delay, it can be counterproductive, can lead to disasters. So temporal dimension is very important for development administration. Farrell Hedy and Wiedner emphasize the spatial dimension of development administration. Spatial. They argue that development administration has to take into account the geographical and demographic specificities in order to become more effective. Professor Grant talks about three distinguishing characteristics of development administration. Three distinguishing characteristics. One, purpose. The purpose of development administration is to bring about institutionalized socio-economic and political changes. This is different from traditional administration. Loyalty. Loyalty should be towards the clients or people and not towards the authoritarian government. And three, attitude. Administrative personnel should be interested in how, when, and where to help the people. Milton Esman emphasizes the political dimension of development administration. Political dimension. He argues that what, when, where, and how are more important as they precede administration. Administration comes only after you have explained what, when, where, and how. And these, according to Esman, are political dimensions of development administration. Now we shall briefly discuss some problems of development administration. What are the problems of development administration? Riggs talks about three problems. One, human environment. Two, physical environment. And three, cultural environment. Human, physical, and cultural environment. By human environment, we mean the size of population, the level of awareness among people. Human resources, is the population just number, or is it educated and skilled? Physical environment would include economic conditions, political system, laws, infrastructure, geography. And cultural environment may include religion, ethnic situation, attitude and aptitude of people, political culture. He argues that the effectiveness of development administration would be measured by its capability to control and change these problems according to requirements. Development administration, the problem before development administration is to control and change these problems according to the requirements. I'll just explain by one example here. A scholar, actually there are many who have talked about this, that the biggest problem in administrative system of India is that nobody is willing to take decisions. There is hesitation. Why should I take? Let somebody else take the decision. Now this is an administrative problem. But what is more interesting is the fact that this problem is because of a socio-cultural specificity that India has. In India, we have had joint family system. Even in unitary family system, the head of the family is the bread earner generally, and all the major decisions are taken by the head of the family, others only obey. Now, scholars argue that it is because of this tendency, this system of decision making in families, that people generally hesitate in taking decisions. They want somebody else to take the decision for them. Now, this is a problem which development administration has to counter. The second problem is citizens' participation. As we had discussed earlier, citizen must participate in planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation and reporting. But all the emphasis on people's participation has remained on paper. Even the system has either been paying lip service or are not actually not much has been done to ensure this, though we have strengthened the Panchayati Raj system and so on and so forth. But involvement, how to involve the people, has remained a problem. People's participation, even in elections, you find the maximum percentage of population ever voted in India was 61%, and the average should be around 55%. So about half the population does not even vote. So involvement in administration has remained a problem. It is either due to lack of political will or lack of weak institutionalization. Third is apathy towards innovation and modernization of administrative tools, techniques, structures, personal systems, etc. Development administration has to be different from traditional administration. It has to be change oriented. It has to take up new tasks and challenges. For that, new techniques, new tools have to be thought about. Innovations have to be made. But there has been general apathy towards that, and that is why many people argue that colonialism brought about an overdeveloped state structure to rule over the colonies, and the same structure has been continued with, and the legacy of the colonial rule continues in administration. Though from public masters you have now been calling them public servants, but actually the mindset is still of public masters. The fourth problem is to strike a balance. This is a very, very important problem which many developing countries have not been able to handle. The problem to strike a balance between all-round development on the one hand and stability on the other. See, when there have been writings, I'm reminded of a book by Robert Ted Gurr, Why Men Rebel. He says it is not poverty, but relative deprivation, the feeling of being deprived relatively, that makes people rebel. A study of most major agitations and revolutions across the globe showed that most of them did not take place when there was acute poverty. most of them took place when after the acute poverty phase, the economic reconstruction or boom phase began. Samuel Huntington said that economic growth may lead to political decay. All these suggest that economic growth brings about problems. Why? Because if everybody is poor, people don't rebel. If I am poor and somebody else is becoming rich, it pinches me more. So, when economic growth is taking place, simultaneously distributive machinery and distribution system must be strengthened. This is the task, this is the most important problem before development administration, to ensure rapid growth and at the same time ensure proper distribution so that stability is not jeopardized, people are not forced to rebel. There have been several criticisms of this approach. We shall very briefly discuss a few of them. Number one, there is no unanimity on the meaning of development. What is development? Is it economic growth? Is it political development? Is it socio-cultural development? So there are people who would come up with various different definitions of development. Second, Wiedner says development is never complete. It is relative, more or less of it being possible. Development is a state of mind, a tendency, a direction. Rather than a fixed goal, it is a rate of change in a particular direction. It is a rate of change in a particular direction. Now, seen in this light, even the advanced nations are developing, because it is not something fixed. You have not achieved this. Okay, I have finished this glass of water, so this is development. It is continuing process. And so there should be no difference between administrative system in the developed societies and administrative system in developing societies, because both of them are developing. But while every modern society is undergoing socio-economic and political change, and administration is required to correspond to these changes, according to Wiedner, there should be no difference. But what makes administration in developing societies different from that in advanced societies is the magnitude and pace of such changes. Changes are taking place in every society, but in developing societies, the magnitude and pace is much higher, much bigger. Also, development administration has to act as catalyst of positive changes and achieve goals in a time-bound manner. So these are the specific requirements which distinguish development administration from traditional administration. Thank you.
So these are the principles, these are the things which are required from the development administrator. But do you think that this is applicable, or this is just in principle?
No, see, administration.
Because you yourself said that decision making lacking, and if decision making is lacking in all administrative setups, so how one can be a change maker as a trend setter?
Yeah, see, I talked about India specifically just to illustrate how socio-cultural milieu affects administration. Mm-hmm. But development administration is for all the the whole of the developing societies. There are specificities in every society, and because of those specificities, the people who go in administration also go with them.
Right.
They have to overcome. That is what my point was. These are the problems which development administration faces, and they have to overcome that.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. The last question I would like to ask you: how the development administration is different from participatory administration?
participatory administration is part of development administration. As I mentioned earlier, Pai Panandika was the person who highlighted this the most, and others also have been writing that development administration cannot be effective unless it is participatory, unless people's participation is ensured. And that remains a problem, of course. People's participation has not been ensured properly in most of the developing societies.
Okay. So, well, friend, I hope you have understood the development administration as Dr. Manibhushan illustrated with example, and also how there are lacunae and the problem in the development administration. So, I think you must have come to know what are the essential features that we have in the development administration. With this word, we'd like to conclude the lecture, and I thank all of you for watching the lecture. And on your behalf, I thank Dr. Manibhushan for giving such a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.